This episode of the CUInsight Experience is brought to you by Allied Solutions. With over 40 years of experience in the financial services industry, Allied Solutions helps more than 4,000 clients grow or enhance their bottom line, protect their business and consumers, and evolve to stay ahead of the competition. Welcome to episode 152 of the show. I am Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com. This show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. Today, I'm having a conversation with Stephanie Covington. Stephanie is the president and CEO of GPO Federal Credit Union in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Hey, Randy. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you for doing this. We are all back in the swing of things. So I'd love to start with a little bit of background on you. And I will tell you, doing a little bit of digging behind the scenes, which basically means going through your LinkedIn. I was so interested to find out how did you start your career and how did that lead you to credit unions and where you are today as the president and CEO of the credit union?
So it's funny, years ago, I started off at Department of Justice Federal Credit Union. That was probably one of my first jobs out of high school. And I was a teller. I hate to say this, I really couldn't balance, so I didn't stay long. And then after that, I moved over to Pentagon Federal Credit Union, where I was there for about 18 years, as a matter of fact. So I was there for a good period of time, started off as a member service representative, worked my way up to a branch manager 3 there. And when I left there, I went while I was at Pentagon Federal, I thought, okay, there's a bit more to this finance game, this banking thing, credit union world. So I left there and went over, to the banking industry. So I started working for Wachovia.
You went to the dark side.
I didn't want to say that. So I went over to the dark side. And so I was with Wachovia for probably about 8 or 9 years, then left Wachovia, went over to, Wells Fargo took over Wachovia. Then I left there, went to Capital One. I was there for a good period of time. And then my last stint in banking was at Bank of America. Then this opportunity presented itself, and then that's how I came back to the credit union movement. And I am so glad to be back. I really am.
Well, we are glad to have you. That's for sure. I'd like to dig into that a little bit. You're not alone. You have 2 stories that I think are more common in credit unions than maybe they are in some other industries. Number one, that idea that you started as a teller and then rose up and now you're the CEO. And that to me seems very uniquely credit union from friends that I've made. The other is that idea of like mid-career, you made the switch over to the banks, but then you came back. I mean, anything for the people out there that are listening, I've heard time and time again over we're now in the 5th year of the podcast, like people that are interviewing for jobs in credit unions, listen to the podcast of the CEO they're interviewing with or whatever it happens to be. So for not only maybe the teller that wants to rise up or the person who's earlier in their career but would like to someday maybe be sitting in your chair, but also for that person who is like, ooh, I miss being in credit unions, but maybe want to come back. Is there any words of advice that you would share for the folks out there listening?
I'm a firm believer in taking advantage of everything that's presented to you. I know that when I did work for Pentagon Federal Credit Union, I did not have my degree when I started there. So I took advantage of their program when it comes down to paying for their tuition reimbursement. And so I got my undergraduate degree while I was with Pentagon Federal Credit Union. And then when I left there, went in the banking industry, I got my graduate degree when I was working with Wachovia. So I took advantage of the programs that they offered when it came down to enhancing your career. Also, I took advantage of all the connections that I've made throughout the years, as a matter of fact. So it's all about those personal relationships, Randy. It really is about those personal relationships. And I came back to the credit union movement because they are a firm believer in people helping people. It's not in the dog, unfortunately in the banking world, it's the dog eat dog world. I love the fact that it's people helping people from large to small credit unions, leadership teams. They always come together to help one another out.
I feel the same way. I got my start was in the banking side of the world as well. So it was, this is my happy place to be. I'd like to ask you about that. You mentioned large and small, and I think that's something that you have a very unique story about as well. I mean, even just with the credit unions you've mentioned, they're fairly large credit unions, but then obviously working for some of the biggest banks in the world. What drew you to a smaller credit union? Just maybe talk a little bit about that experience, because, as we know, boy, I was at a conference recently and talking to April Klobus, who's been on the show from Michigan State Credit Union, and she was on a panel with some bankers, and she was like, I'm not used to being called the little institution, right? But relatively speaking, when you're talking Bank of America. So tell me, I guess, what's that transition been like? And I guess what excites you about that opportunity as well?
I think that I wanted to get my foot in the door, to be honest with you, back into the door, because, of course, I came back from Bank of America and I came to GPO Federal Credit Union. So it was coming back to the credit union. So the opportunity presented itself. The other thing is that I think from the small credit union perspective, it allows you to really tap into your team and get to know your team and to help with the development and process of your team members, to help them to go into the next level. So I think that was the big attraction when it came down to working for a smaller institution. Now, mind you, there are their challenges that are there
Absolutely,
as well.
yeah.
But I think that was one of the main attractions for me.
I'd like to touch on that. We can go both the challenges side, but also what has you excited. We're in a new year. What has you excited, not only at your credit union, but for the industry overall? And then if you could speak on what challenges are you seeing today that I guess what's the frustration, right? Like when it comes to the current environment we're in as well.
Just the new technology that's out there and the different ways in which our members and just ourselves, we can do business, to be honest with you. There's a plethora of things that is out there, and it's just opening up a world of opportunity there. But on the other side, those opportunities present challenges because for smaller credit unions, because of the cost of them that's involved when it comes down to initiating them. So it's a good thing. I'm looking forward to that. But on the other side, it also can hold back smaller institutions because they don't have the liquidity or the capital to invest in the modern way of doing banking or offering financial services.
The first couple of years of the show, I had asked the question and I knew where I stood personally on this question, but in my view, it wasn't as resolute anymore, right? Just like anything in life, I was like, oh, maybe my perception is off. But something you just spoke on, that idea of is technology an equalizer? Access to technology an equalizer to smaller credit unions or credit unions in general, or is it a disadvantage, right? Because the idea of offering online banking just like Bank of America or that type of a service, it seems to me that some smaller credit unions have found ways to do it well, and others it has been that struggle that almost, you hate to say it, we've seen the numbers go down, right? Merges them out or whatever it happens to be. I guess, where do you fall on that as far as, is technology an equalizer or is it a deterrent for our movement?
I guess I would have to say that I'm on a seesaw right now, to be honest with you. There are some services which, when it comes down to putting them into place, they don't cost as much as others in some sense. So something like online banking, remote deposit capture, those are the type of things that can be an equalizer. But then yet on the other end of the spectrum, you have Zelle, you have upgrading your ATMs. Those are more of the expensive things that are on the other end of the spectrum that unfortunately smaller credit unions aren't able to offer. I know that, you look at getting an ATM, new ATM will cost you about $45,000,
Yeah,
so,
absolutely right.
Yeah, so it can be pretty expensive.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned the connections that you made throughout your career. I'd love to talk about that a little bit more. I know I've received your name from Renee over at ACUC. Before we got on the line, you and I were talking about Jill, and you both were in a cross-cultural program through ACUC. When it comes to not only your network, but also the mentors you've had along the way, could you speak to that? And then on the flip side, you mentioned, it's part of being at the credit union. You love that you can help bring others up in their career as well. How do you give back as well now that, you are the CEO? And I'm sure that you have a lot of folks that come talk to you that are like, all right, I'd like to do that someday. That seems like a good gig.
Yeah, I could have to say that my very first mentor was somebody that I still keep in contact with today at Wachovia. Her name was Carla Johnson. And so she was one of those individuals that she was a big picture person, which of course, you know, with in a CEO position, you have to be the big picture person. And she talked to me about how to look at things, not only from a business perspective, but also from your team members as well. Her background is in HR. And so I still keep in touch with her today. I still run things by her. You know, of course, Renee, she's always there to help, always there to help. As a matter of fact, she just called me, so I'm going to have to call her back after this.
You'll have to let her know what you're talking
Right.
about. That's awesome.
And then the other thing is I have basically developed a network of counterparts, to be honest with you, through the leagues. And so we bounce things off of one another. And even from a standpoint of, you know, we get frustrated as well.
Right.
So, you know, yeah, we can air out our grievances with one another. And then it's also a place to know that, you know what, this one thing that I'm dealing with right now, I'm not by myself. So that I could speak to somebody else that has a different perspective. As far as giving back, I want to be a mentor, and I help to develop my team members. You know, LaTanya Allen is on my team. If you know anything about LaTanya, she's a rising star in the credit union industry, and I'm just so proud of her. And it's so funny because the other day we had a roundtable with the league, and after the league, you know, the CEOs, we got up there and they were asking us questions. And after the session, a young lady walked up to me and from another credit union. You know, she loved the information for which she was receiving and wanted to reach out to me from speaking to a woman, and especially a woman of color in the position that I am. And so she wanted to speak to me and she wanted to talk to LaTanya. So we actually have a conversation, or I guess you could say a coffee and connect time set up where we're going to one another and look at developing a mentorship program with her.
That is beautiful. You know what I love about that, and I hear it on the show, and I think it's so important, is not only were you out there obviously putting yourself out there and willing, but the woman also came up to ask. There are probably plenty of other people in the room who were thinking the same thing maybe, but didn't walk up and say, hey, right, I want to pick your brain. Help me, without asking. I think that's a huge thing. Gosh, wow, there's a bunch of different directions I'd like to go there, and I'm trying to see which rabbit hole to go down here. I guess when I'm thinking back, there's something else that I'd love to touch on, and from time to time we have on the show, is like having that network that you mentioned. That idea, sometimes it's lonely at the top. I always think the CEO position is such an interesting one, right? You have your team at the credit union. You also have your board and those bosses above you, right? Like, and then there's you right in the middle as the CEO. So is that network of other leaders that you can share thoughts, ideas, challenges? I think challenges a lot of the times the biggest part of it. Do you also have the people that can, come to you and say, what are you thinking, Stephanie? That's a terrible idea. That can speak truth to power that way as well, right? Because sometimes I find that I've found in my career, at least, that sometimes those can be the most powerful. Many of us, we have friends, family, even, associates who will just be like, that's amazing. But sometimes when the other person's like, that's not so amazing. Have you thought about this? That can be even more powerful.
Yeah. It's funny when I look at presenting maybe a new product or service or a project to somebody, I think about, there's this one person on my team, and I always think about, okay, what questions is she going to have? What pushback is she going to have? And to be honest with you, it keeps me grounded and humble. And I love that because, I don't have all the answers at all. And so I want that feedback. And again, there are bad decisions that we may make. And so we want to have somebody who can say, I don't think that's going to work. I don't think that's going to work for us, or I don't think it's going to work for our membership.
From a leadership standpoint, how have you created the space, I guess, that like the person that you're talking about on your team knows that they can come to you and push back? I kind of think back to that I think many of us came up in it, right? Like that almost more traditional CEO, this is the way we do it. It's kind of a downward, but not allowing the conversation to flow back up or to speak to power that way. How have you created the space that your team knows that they can come to you and disagree with you, quite honestly? And in the end, you still have to make the decision, right? You're the CEO, but like that they know they can express themselves. And I guess on the flip side of that, How do you get buy-in? Like how do you get them to see your vision as well? That's such a big thing.
So I think when I first started, I started out and say, look, I'm new to this position and I don't know everything. You guys, most of my team they've been here for years. And so they knew the membership. From another perspective, I knew what the board had wanted, what their vision was for the credit union and where they wanted us to go. So I've always had an open door policy, and I empower my team, to be honest with you, to come up with ideas and to bring those ideas to me. And we discuss and we talk through those ideas. We look at, and it's funny because I always tell them, if you come in with an idea or if you're coming with a grievance, to be honest with you, always offer an alternate perspective or to what you want to present. And so the good and the bad, and let's talk through it. So I've always had an open door policy, to be honest with you.
I found this really interesting. And to give you a little background where I'm coming from on this, end of last year, I had the opportunity to go over to Africa with Akaska. And we were part of the Climb Africa program to raise awareness for their academy and climb Kilimanjaro, all this crazy stuff. But one of the things that I was amazed with was with George Ambato, the CEO of Akaska, was so able to bring his vision forward, not only to his board and to his staff, but also to people around the world, right? Like when a few things fell apart in the beginning when we were putting the program together, he was able to bring his vision to Renee at ACUC to help with the, collecting US dollars and things like that. And it was just such an amazing thing to watch, I guess. And so when you're talking about, when people if they have questions, whether it's somebody on your team or your board, have you picked up any hacks, I guess, along the way, right? Of getting your vision across and bringing people along so that they see why you're doing what you're doing or what you're trying to do with the credit union.
Even when you're sitting down and you're establishing that vision and putting it together, putting pen to paper and the thoughts to pen to paper, I always bring my team in. And we discuss, okay, what do we want to see? Where do we want to go? Now, mind you, of course, the board has their vision as well, and then we're there to implement it. But then yet, if I have my teams buy in, at that point, we can present to the board together. And we have, a united front in some sense, where it's just okay, we're going to have the pros and the cons to everything when we present it to them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to say that the board, they go with everything that we present. Not by
Absolutely,
no means.
right?
No.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't happen. But I think if you go in together, because I have my leadership team as part of my my board meetings. We go in together, we go in as a united front. I think that your board is more apt to listening to your thoughts and ideas when you have a whole team that is you have their buy-in.
I'd love to ask you a question on this. It's one that I've brought up on the podcast over the years because it's been interesting to watch in speaking to friends of mine who we've come up in credit unions together, and when they get their shot to be a CEO. Often what I've heard, that kind of big surprise moment was, even if you have dealt with, like you saying, you bring your senior leadership team to the board, to the board meetings. But there's an interesting relationship when you're the CEO. So when you had a long career in credit unions and banking before you were the CEO, when suddenly you are the CEO and you go from having one boss to having 10, in a sense. But that I still always will remember a friend of mine saying that she didn't realize once she was the CEO how much fire the previous CEO was actually taking from her, basically, on a day-to-day basis. For someone sitting out there today who maybe they're out there interviewing for CEO jobs right now and they've never been one before, can you take away some of the surprise, I guess, for them? Or is there any enlightenment, I guess, you could share on, that relationship when you get into that seat?
Yeah, you just have to realize that depending upon how big your board is, 5 or 7, if you have a 7-person, 10-person, 13-person board, you just have to realize that you have 13 or 5, 7 different personalities, to be honest with you. And so you have to get to know those individuals not just in the boardroom, but sometimes you have to try and get to know them outside of the boardroom as well. So that when you are presenting them, it's just like, okay, I know what this individual is going to say about this, or I know based on what I know about this other board member, how they're going to react. And so it's about getting to know your board members, not only inside the credit union, but also, having that coffee and connect and getting to know them outside. And I have to say that I did not do that in the beginning. And I think it's something that I had to learn over time. It's just like, okay, I got all these different personalities and I have to learn. It's just like, having a kid. Each one of them has this different personality and you know how to treat each one of them based on that personality.
Absolutely. Oh, that is fantastic advice. One of the things I love about the podcast is I get to just ask these goofy, like scratch my own itch, questions that pop into my brain. And a while ago, I was listening to another podcast and I heard this question and I absolutely loved it. But in the example I'll give you is what's the greatest investment you've made in your career? And the example that I give, because they did on the podcast, was Warren Buffett said it was the Dale Carnegie course years ago. Is there an investment in your career that you look back on that you're like, that was worth the time, money, energy, but it has also helped me along the way?
Yeah, I think it was when I decided that I had already got my master's degree in business management. And so being in management, there are a lot of different things that come up when it comes down to HR. And so I went back went to University of Phoenix and got a graduate certificate in HR management. And I think that was a great investment for me in learning how to connect with my team. And then also, it's not only just connecting with the team, but also when it comes down to the laws as well, learning those things. So I think that was my best investment, to be honest with you.
That's really cool. When we're talking about building the team, is there something that you're looking for if you were thinking of direct reports like on your senior leadership team? Is there something that you're looking for when you're bringing someone new on board and into the organization? And do you have anything that's just like if you hear it in an interview, you're like, yeah, that's a no-go. Nope, just shuts you down instantly?
I think that being open and to take risks, always knowing that all your risks aren't going to pan out that you're taking, but just being open to take that risk and taking ownership as well. So if you're consistent, if you're one of those who wants to blame it on somebody else, that's a no-no, because it's just like at that point, it's like, you're not taking any ownership for it, because there's always your part in anything that happens. And so sometimes you have to do a self-reflection. So that's one of those that will stop the interview for me.
What makes a good leader? A good CEO? Is there something that you think that people need to have to do a good job at it?
Having vision, being agile, because, things they're changing every single day. Here's the thing. I don't like to call myself a quote unquote manager. I rather look at it from a leader perspective. So being able to lead and being able to get your team members buy-in.
Something that you mentioned in one of your last answers, it was just kind of sticking here in the back of my head. And that's that idea of like, not everything we try and do or every project is going to succeed. And I know from personal experience, one of my toughest things to do was to kill a project I thought was going to be amazing. So that idea of throwing good energy or good money or good time over bad sometimes is a tough thing to, let's just say, kill the project. How do you, I guess, whether it's with your team or just internally, yourself personally, make sure that you're still taking the risk, you're still moving the credit union forward? And then, on the flip side, if an idea doesn't work, any hacks on when to stop it, I guess, before you, because much like so many people that are listening, myself included, as what I would say is leaders of smaller organizations, we only have so many resources. So there's a million projects. We can do one or two at a time, right? So any thoughts there?
I'm a firm believer in running pilots. So it's not the all in thing. So I'm minimizing my risk in some sense. So looking at running pilots and just doing it with a small sector of maybe my members or with my team members to see as far as my vision and if it's going to pan out. And then that way, if it doesn't pan out, at least I'm not taking a huge hit when it comes down to our bottom line, because I've put my all into this one project. It did not work out. And then we've lost a significant amount of money. So I'm a true believer in running pilots.
That's great advice. A question for you: over the past few years, I think a lot of our mentality has changed on what working in a credit union means. Whether it was back during the pandemic, no one ever thought you could be remote, right, and work for a credit union. And we all had to pivot and change. If you were looking forward for somebody that's coming, maybe it's a recent college grad or somebody coming out of high school, like what does a career in credit unions look like to you over the next 5-10 years?
That's a good question. If I sit back and think about it, I just look at just knowing that wherever you come, doing things in teams, working together as a team. Because, years ago, it was just about, okay, I'm at my desk. It's just me. I'm going to do my work. I have my assignment. That's it. But now everything connects. Everything that you're doing within the credit union connects. So you have to be able to work with other individuals and know that you're part of a team. So you guys have to be able to, collaborate. So that's the thing, being able to collaborate and do it as a team. And then again, of course, that other word that I'm just being agile, because things are always changing.
Is there anything, before we move on and have a little bit of fun with the rapid fire questions, is there anything that you were hoping we were going to talk about today, or I would ask you that I haven't?
No, I told you before, I'm not that public speaking. This kind of took me outside of my comfort zone.
You are doing amazing. And I think every listener will tell you that.
So no, there was nothing that I could think of at the moment.
Awesome. Well, it wouldn't be the CUInsight Experience with a few rapid fire questions. So the questions are rapid, but your answers do not have to be. So the first one, what's the first job you ever had? Do you have a job in high school or before the credit union?
I did. I worked for the Department of Education. I was one part of their student program over there. So I worked at Department of Education filing and doing things like that.
So were you born and raised DC?
I was born and raised in DC.
Well, you were right in the center of everything there. That's wild. When was the last time you, whether it was personally or professionally, were just like, that's amazing?
I think personally, I look at my niece and my nephews and just their ability, because especially my niece, she's in college right now, and her ability to multitask. She was on the basketball team there. And so, it's kind of hard being a student athlete and then being able to keep your grades up. So I was just amazed at her and her ability to not only play basketball, but still remain on the honor roll, keep her GPA up to where it needs to be. So I have to say that she amazed me.
That is an impressive feat. I wasn't on the basketball team and had trouble keeping my GPA up. So is there anything that you're currently working on for yourself? It's the new year. A lot of us tend to have those personal goals as well, right? Like the self-improvement side that's taken up that space in Stephanie's world currently.
I guess it's more so me listening more. Don't get me wrong. I listen. But there are times like I'm dyslexic, so my mind runs much faster than my mouth does. And so sometimes when someone's talking, I may interrupt. And so I've just like, okay, Stephanie, you got to pull back from that. And so I found myself where I write down when someone's talking, I'm writing down my thoughts and my questions because again, my mind, because if I don't do it, I'm going to forget it. So it's learning how to, I guess you could say, navigate through this slight disability that I have in some sense.
I understand that completely. My monkey mind's always going forward. That idea of listening more. And I have a friend, I've mentioned this on the podcast before, that I think he does a fantastic job. He's from down in South Carolina, where in the beginning when we were first friends, I thought he spoke slower, but he actually listens the full way through before he starts to talk, and I'm like, oh, that's so different than my mind. That's already got 4,000 different things running through when I'm listening to somebody talk. So I'm like, I need to do that more. So one of the things that I found, from talking to other leaders, leading an organization can consume us, right? And a lot of us, we get to that leadership spot by working hard, putting our head down, doing all those type of things. And often that can be at the detriment to, say, family life outside of work. Have you figured out anything along the way to kind of keep that balance of life going, or any hacks you could share with our listeners?
Yeah, I believe in a work-life balance. And I think one of the reasons why is because I took care of my mother when she was sick, and, she lived with me until she transitioned. And so I believe in taking that personal time because you have to disconnect. So my thing is that when I start feeling anxious or I start feeling like overwhelmed, at that point, that's me telling myself, okay, it's time to take some time. It's a vacation. It's time to disconnect. And sometimes you need those staycations where it's just, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just home and I'm just going to relax. But I do believe in that disconnecting.
I agree. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? And if you don't mind, who gave it to you?
Best piece of advice I ever received was believe in yourself and never underestimate your value. And that was from my mother.
Ah, beautiful. I love that. Is there anything that you're unreasonably, let's say, thrifty on, where you just don't like to spend money?
Let me be clear. I'm thrifty on everything.
Everything.
I look for deals on everything. So there's nothing specific. So if it's a car, you're going to tell me the price. I know there's a better deal. So I'm going to go hunt for it. So yeah, I guess you can say thrifty on
everything. I love it. What's the greatest album of all time? That album that Stephanie can listen to from front to back, or you never turn it off?
I think the greatest album of all time would be Thriller by Michael Jackson. He won 7 Grammys for that album. It's just that you have the beginning of Billie Jean that comes on and it just gets your head to rocking. And then you're picturing that video. So I'm going to say Michael Jackson's Thriller.
That is probably one of the more popular answers on the 5 years of the show, to tell you the truth. So I wonder how much of that is our average age, let's just say, right? Like of how big that was in our life, right? Like that time. So this question I added last year to the show after having dinner with NCUA Chairman Harper at AACUC, actually, to tell you the truth. But he's been on the show and he said, you know what question I would love for you to ask? And I'm like, this should be good. Please tell me. And it was, who plays you in the movie biopic of Stephanie's life? Who's the actor?
Wow. I think I have 2 people. It would be either Regina King or Taraji P. Henson. I love both of their bodies of work. Taraji, she's a DC girl. She was born and raised in DC. So yeah, either one of them.
She could nail you. Is there something you're currently reading or that book that you think everybody should read?
I'm very strong in my faith. And so it's a Christian book and it's called Life Interrupted, Navigating the Unexpected by Priscilla Shirer. And so, really enjoying that book.
Beautiful. We will link to that for sure in the show notes. When you hear the word success, who is the first person that comes to mind and why?
You probably get this from everybody. I'm going to say Oprah.
I will say this. It has not come up as much, but after the first season, we kind of flipped the script and Jill interviewed me and Oprah is mine.
And I think from the success of her talk show and the fact that she was actually considered the first real influencer.
Absolutely.
And so, of course, that's a job now with social media and everything else, but she was considered the first influencer. And then I think the fact that she's able to remain relevant, even though she's retired, she's given up her job, she's able to remain relevant. She's agile. She's able to move. She does a lot of things on social media. And then her philanthropic spirit that she has, I just love it. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I've said it before. I think Oprah changed the world in the sense that she actually allowed us to talk about things as well that none of us did beforehand. So it was like a cultural shift from her talk show. So last question for you. Do you have any final thoughts or asks you'd like to share with our listeners?
It's funny. I had some time with my girlfriends this weekend, and one of the things that they brought up, both my cousin and a girlfriend from high school, they had said something that was just like, wow. They said, if I were to leave today or tomorrow, what would I want written into my obituary? What would people say about me? And so I always think about, what my mother says about believing in yourself and know your value. And so I think the bottom line for me is I will want my obituary to say that she cared, she served, she lived her life to the fullest, she loved and is loved.
That is a beautiful way to wrap this up. Thank you so much for doing this, Stephanie. I've enjoyed this thoroughly. I hope our paths cross soon as we're in the new year, maybe at one of the events, GAC or
Yes.
ACUC or something like that. If people have additional questions of you, what's your poison? Can people get a hold of you? Email, LinkedIn?
Oh, they can LinkedIn, or they can email me at scovington@gpofcu.org.
We will link to that, and we will link to your LinkedIn as well. And everything else we talked about, the books and everything, the thriller in the show notes. So thank you again for being here, Stephanie. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on. This has been an honor.
A few things before we go. Make sure to check out Allied Solutions in the show notes and see how you can leverage their 40 years of experience to help your credit union grow. They are a longtime partner of CUInsight.com and the podcast, and I'm grateful for their support to allow me to have this much fun doing what I do. Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. And if you're looking for a book mention, like the one from Stephanie today, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and you can have your next read on the way from Amazon. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock. I appreciate the kind words that come in about the show. I really hope to see you all soon on the road here in this new year. Be well, friends. Talk to you soon.